Go. Welcome to the PRCA Fuse podcast for the stories behind great PR and marketing people with a passion for communications, hosted by me, Adrian Marr. Our special guest today is Suresh Raj, who is someone that I used to work with back in the early noughties, and Suresh has had a glittering career. He's moved from independents to networks, from UK to global roles, and he's been recognised as one of the world's leading LGBTQ plus executives by the Financial Times. In this conversation, we cover everything from his career in the boy band through to how he got into PR, some tough times in New York, and how Anthony Bourdain helped him through that, his views on independent versus network agencies, and how culture happens when you're brave enough to let your heart lead. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Hi, Adrian. Thank you so much again for this opportunity. I'm Suresh Raj. I'm the Chief Growth Officer for M&C Saatchi North America. And really what that translates to is helping build not just necessarily a pipeline, but actually culturally shifting the business to build growth and momentum within the ambitions that we want to achieve in the market. So to be an agency of choice, to have the right proposition in market, and working very closely with the CEO to also build a culture of growth within the organization. And when I say a culture of growth, is inspiring our own teams and inspiring our own people to want to pull together to create something that to make work that matters and to also create an offering in market that really stands out.
Amazing.
So ultimately, that's my ambition and my role.
And thank you for joining us. And I've not briefed you on this first question, but I think you've got a fantastic origin story. And I know that you love music and you've produced music in the past, and you've been recruited by MTV for a very special project. Are you happy to talk to us a little bit about that? Because I'd love for our listeners to hear about this and how it relates to how you ended up in your first job in PR, which is where I think I met
Sure.
you.
That's
First
where
job.
we met. Yes, indeed. No, 100%. Totally. Yes, happy to share that. I think, as you may know, my origins, I was born and brought up in Malaysia. And to very mixed parentage. In fact, my mother's half Malay, half Arab. My dad is half Indian, half Palestinian Jew. But growing up in Malaysia, the one thing, as you might appreciate as an Asian individual, is study hard, work hard, get a good job, right? And I was only allowed to do 4 career lines, which is a doctor, lawyer, and engineer, and accountant. That's the 4 sort of paths I had to choose from. But I wasn't cut out. I was possibly going to do accountancy or law because I had a sort of inclination for that, but I wasn't motivated by it. But my parents sort of agreed to allowing me to study media and communications. So I did that. And literally the day I graduated, this is going back 1996, the very next day, now that I had done what my parents wanted me to do, I was going to do what I wanted to do. And so I quietly, without their permission, without them knowing when to audition for a boy band that MTV was putting together. It was the very first reality TV show of any kind. This was the original concept. And it's a shame because I don't think it ever got credit for it. So this is 1996, before X Factor and Fame Academy and Britain's Got Talent and all of that. But so I quietly went to MTV in Camden Town. I don't know whether they're still there anymore, but I went in and auditioned, and we were being recorded. And they were also simultaneously doing auditions in Berlin and Stockholm. So they had German and Stockholm, Sweden, correct? I got that right? Yes. Because so they did Stockholm, Swedish. They were auditioning Swedish guys, German guys, and Brits, and they were going to create the very first reality TV show music boy band that was also the very first time pan-European. Because at that point, it was the heyday of Take That and Boyzone and all of these bands. Long story short, I get back to my flat in Oakwood, North London, and I had no TV, so I never knew what happened to the audition. And for 3 months running, there was a live voting process. The judges and the producers and the audience, the sort of the viewers were voting in, and he kept shortlisting to the final 5 guys. And on the 3 months later, I get a call. And incidentally, I should say I was living above this Greek restaurant. And you will all know sort of the chap that I was working in his restaurant while I was at university. Lovely chap, and his name was Dimitri. Demetrius turned out like he's Stavros Flatley. So my landlord at that time was also subsequently became a famous person, but he's Stavros Flatley. But anyway, so I get this call from MTV, and Davina McCall is on the phone, uh, about to announce that you're the first guy to be sort of selected to join this boy band, and it was just like a bloody awesome moment. And I'm screaming on the phone, and it's a payphone, by the way, in this flat, right? So it's like a coin operated payphone. Um, and long story short, I get appointed into this boy band. I get selected into this boy band. We're formed together. We're put together. And I've not met these guys before. This set of English twins, a German guy who ended up becoming an actor subsequently, and then this Swedish guy who actually ended up becoming the most famous amongst all five of us because he went on to become a really big director, movie and film director and TV director in Sweden. And actually, some of his work is still on like Netflix. I think The Young Royals, which was in a highly awarded program Netflix series. But anyway, so they throw us into this band together, and for 6 months we're touring the world. We're being sort of shepherded in like chartered planes all around the world. And I remember at one point in performing in MTV, so we had choreographers. I used to do all our choreography and sort of singing rehearsals in Right Said Fred studios. I can't remember where it is in Upper London. We used to go and Right Said Fred used to come into the studios, etc. So we would do all of this. And then in the lead up to a launch, so we were being launched at this big concert in Germany, Popcom, and it was in Cologne in Germany. And so we are getting rehearsed, we're doing all the dress rehearsals, and the people who did Michael Jackson's sort of outfits were kitting us out for the gigs. We're launched, and we also happened to be at that point when we were launched, we were the opening act for the Spice Girls, and they had already had their third number one, I think, at that point. So they were still new on the market, but new in the scene. I think they launched in 1995, and the big hits came in 1996. But they had their third number one, so we were like the opening act for the Spice Girls. And little bit of a snippet here, but last week in Cannes, we had Mel C DJ our 30th anniversary for M&C Saatchi. And so I had a moment with Mel C, and I went up to her and said, look, you won't even remember me, but 30 years ago, I was in a boy band that was your opening act. And she goes like, oh my God, which one? And stuff. And I said, oh, this gig that we did in Popcom in Cologne in Germany. And she went, the one Robbie Williams headline, because Robbie Williams was the headline performer that year. And I went, oh shit, yes, it was. And she goes, have you got the video? So I started showing her the video on YouTube. She goes, I fucking remember. Oh shit, sorry, I just swore. But I fucking remember I remember thinking she clearly didn't remember. She remembered the guy, the boy band, but she didn't remember each individual. She remembered Robbie Williams headlining, and she remembered Boyzone was there too. And I didn't have the clips of Boyzone. I went, yes, you're absolutely right. Boyzone was there. So I realized I had the opportunity. I had cracked open the music career, and my parents finally realized. I guess he's got talent. We probably should just let him pursue that for a bit. So I did that. Unfortunately, because we were put together by MTV, we never actually. So we didn't get paid. Like I was washing. The reason I was talking about the landlords because I used to wash dishes in Stavros Flatley's restaurant. I used to go wash the dishes at the back of the kitchen. I ended up working my way to becoming the bar manager. Lovely chap. And after about a year of just trying with the boy band, and we just never saw any money, it was tough to live. Right, I had already graduated. I needed to put food on the table. I'd take free food from the Greek restaurant, Saatchi Taverna in Oakwood, and then I would struggle, like literally struggle to make a living. And then I went on to the group just didn't function, so they didn't quite invest in it. So I broke off and actually signed multiple, like 2 solo deals. But again, as a Southeast Asian, Middle Eastern individual trying to break the mainstream music scene, it was incredibly difficult. So I gave music a really good shot for 2 years. And I just realized that it was just not working out. So I completed my MBA at that point, and then came back. And I remember the moment I thought about the career I wanted. I was in the boy band in one of the interviews that were being interviewed by the Evening Standard, I think, the music section. And I remember thinking, sitting in the room, that, well, if this career doesn't work out, that career across the table is possibly quite interesting because it's suitably glitzy, glamorous. You hang about with musicians, etc. I'd love to know a little bit about journalism and PR, and I'd like to get into that. So that's how I ended up getting my break in PR.
Oh, that's an incredible story, and I think the listeners will can hear already that you have had a very interesting career. And the reason I've asked you to come onto this podcast is because I do think that you've had an absolutely brilliant career.
Thank you.
You know, you're currently sat there in New York in your new role at M&C. You've moved from indie agency to global networks, and now like global roles. Can you take us to each of those moments? You know, what were those moments, those inflection points that are pivotal that have helped you shape your career trajectory? And a bonus question to that: um, do you feel that your MBA helped you in any of
Oh,
those moments?
good question. Um, okay, I'll tackle the MBA question first. I think if anything, this is going to be a terrible plug for the university. Did it help me? No. Like, I didn't get a job because I have an MBA, and frankly, I sometimes even forget to even tell people I've got that qualification until I actually go into my LinkedIn and goes, "Oh yeah, I've got an MBA. I forgot about that." Um, but I tell you what it did do, it reaffirmed in me the one thing that the MBA sort of really trains you for is a disciplined mindset. But I've always been a disciplined individual. All it did was reaffirm my focus and discipline. That's it. My ability to be a very disciplined individual. So, did it boost me? No. But did it reassure me? Yes. So it's a bit of a hit and miss. So really, I'm not dismissing MBAs at all. I think they're value. Any form of education is incredibly valuable. You just need to know why you're doing it. And so for me, it was much more around a qualification rather than affirmation of what I wanted to use it, because all it did for me was reassure me that I have a very disciplined approach to life and to work, I just continued to apply that. Pivotal moments in my career, to be honest, Adrian, I think maybe it's even just the upbringing of coming up from Southeast Asia and then ultimately becoming naturalizing as a Brit. Um, I've always worked hard. I've just had, and that's the point of discipline, right? I've just naturally always worked hard, and I've always wanted to achieve. Why I want to achieve, I'm not so sure, because I come from my parents were not rich. My mother was a housewife. My dad was a government officer. We never really had anything plush in life. I think, if anything, I really wanted to achieve because I wanted to have, I wanted to experience things. Like, my dad never changed his car for over 30 years. My entire life, he had the exact same car, whereas other parents were changing cars every 2 weeks. And I'll tell you that for a real context, because or every 2 weeks, I beg your pardon, for every two years. And I remember thinking, my father's best friend was a very enterprising individual. There's no reflection on my dad, but he just wasn't. He was a government officer, and he was very content with life that way, whereas I was a lot more ambitious. I wanted so much more out of life. And I remember his best friend was a very enterprising individual who would change his car every 2 years, and he moved from, like, like a Ford Escort at that point to a Mercedes, and then he had the latest Mercedes as well. And I remember when I was 17 and he brought the latest Mercedes. This is like 1988, I think, or 89, and he drove 1990, and he drove his latest Mercedes, which was like top of the range in the country. In a country like Malaysia, everybody knows, like, wow, you're driving Mercedes, you've really made it. And he drove his Mercedes to our house, and I remember looking at the car and said, that's the car I'm going to buy. When I grow up and I can get and afford a car, that's the car I'm going to buy, like a Mercedes. I remember, and not that it meant anything to me, but I just remember that was a sense of achievement. And I was 35 years old when I finally got my license, British license, and I bought my very first car, and I was still on an L plate, and it was a Mercedes. So it was a milestone. That was a pivotal moment. But to your point on the pivotal moments in my career, I've never had a. I wish I did, and I encourage now everybody I mentor to have a life plan. have a 1, 3, 5 year life plan. You may not get to where you want in the life plan. What you are doing is actually charting a map and a route, and that helps. It pushes you in the right direction, or creates clarity in your mind whether that direction is for you, right? So for me, if anything, the one thing that's been consistent is my focus on discipline and being the best in all that I do and who I am. And that is individually, personally, as a human being, and the other part is professionally. So, and I often talk, because I do have a platform on diversity and inclusion, and I get a lot of questions from diverse individuals who ask me, like, I can't seem to crack the market, and there's no fair opportunity for a person of color, which there are contexts which is true, and I'm not denying that. But a lot of the times, some of these individuals, sort of the way they express it, feels like they're expecting to be appointed because they're a person of color, using the diversity as a reason for appointment versus actually being the best in there. And I'm not saying that they're not, because I don't know the individuals particularly well. So my message to a lot of these individuals is, be the best in your field. Be the best that you can. So in my instance, whilst I started in actual public relations, if you remember, Adrian, you and I actually collaborated a number of times. I did it for the first 5, 6 years in the craft of storytelling and landing and media relations. Within the first 5 years, the 5 years of my career, that's what I did. And then I pivoted to new business. And in my mind, I wanted to be the best new business growth individual there was. And that's it. I literally worked at that, and I traded on that. So every opportunity I had from there was because I built a reputation as being a really solid new business growth operator. And for me, that was the thing that drove me into my career, because I think 16 years of my career was in the UK, which is where it took me to Ogilvy, which is where the real milestone, a life changing point happened, because a year and a half in London, in Ogilvy London, I started in Ogilvy PR. I was leading the UK office in growth. Then I took on an EMEA role within 6 months, and within a year and a half, I was promoted to global MD, or Chief Business Development Officer for Ogilvy PR, and was moved from London to New York. And that was a massive turning point in my life, because it was not just cultural, but I moved countries in my career. Whilst I've moved before for education, this was the first time I moved for my job and for my role. And that for me was a key turning point.
And it's an interesting point, because I do remember how disciplined you were and how dedicated you were to new business. And I remember our boss at the time was describing you as a Rottweiler, and you were sat
Mhm.
there with your headset on with a list, like, these are all the brands are going to call you. And just smashed that out there, and you were so disciplined. And yeah, I could see that drive within you from a very early age. And fantastic that it took you from a UK to a global role. Talk to me a little bit about the differences between working in the US versus the UK, because when we look at the US from a UK perspective, we see bigger brands, bigger budgets, and also a completely different work culture. What are the differences that you've noticed between the UK and US PR and agency landscapes?
Sure. Night and day.
Really?
Absolutely night and day, genuinely night and day. And from a cultural point of view, the discipline and the craft of it, not necessarily incredibly different, but from an approach and cultural point of view, night and day. And I give you the context because a lot of people said to me, "Oh well, you've lived and worked in London. You are just going to adjust perfectly fine because New York's like just like London." Hand on heart, it isn't. And anybody who says that is telling absolute fibs. And I think maybe that was also a detriment, because everybody said that to me, and so in my head I expected that. I literally, as I landed in New York, I put London in New York and thought, I'm going to adjust. Everything's be perfect. And I give you the context, and very simply, the briefing I received from my then global chairman when I moved from London to New York, I'll admit, embarrassingly admit, that I didn't even understand what he meant, but I smiled and I nodded, because that's the kind of person I am. I smile, nod, then I'll go and do my research, right? Um, and he said, "Sharpen your elbows." That was it. That was the brief. Sharpen your elbows. And I didn't understand what that meant because I've always prided myself on operating with real humanity and just being nice. And maybe that's the Southeast Asian cultural upbringing. Is like you don't get anywhere in life by being a ruthless, aggressive individual. It's about just being nice as a human being. So I've always, that was my modus operandi. And when he told me this and he gave me this briefing, I just didn't understand it. And I had to Google it. And I said, well, corporate America can be quite aggressive. And I didn't understand because thankfully, I moved with my English CEO. So he was CEO of EMEA and he was promoted to global CEO. And so I had a network and I knew people within the organization already. But very quickly, just by being very disciplined in what I did, the impact I had from a global level within Ogilvy PR. So bear in mind, Ogilvy had multiple operating companies. So you've got O&M, Ogilvy One, Ogilvy PR, so on and so forth. The discipline and rigor that we had within Ogilvy, and I was also the person who conceived and curated and developed the very first CRM tool that was being used across all of Ogilvy PR. It was so successful because it allowed us to prioritize priority opportunities as a leadership team globally, and therefore focus on that, and that led to better conversions and winning because we were putting all the best people against all the best opportunities that ladded up to sort of increasing our pitch wins. And by doing so, we really started to get noticed by the group because Ogilvy PR is really the smaller division. We were like $350 million, whereas we're talking about a $4 or $5 billion company at Ogilvy level, right? And by no means did we have advertising budgets at that point. And when we started to realize, when the group started to realize, hang on, what is it? Is about something's happening in Ogilvy PR where our conversion was going through the roof, our margins at 20-25%, which is beyond other sort of parts of the business. And everybody started to notice there was a real rigor and discipline to how we were creating the culture of growth. And that's when basically the global group CEO, Miles Young, took a sort of a shine to me and said, like, there's something that's happening in growth. And this guy who's leading it, Suresh, is doing wonders in it, and that elevated me to the group level role, which I ended up becoming Chief Business Development Officer across Ogilvy Group. That's when the knives came out, honestly, and that's me being very direct, simply because not just the fact that I've always operated in a very different way and all just believed in being a nice, decent human being, but suddenly a PR guy, the PR guy, is suddenly leading all divisions, including the creative division. And I hadn't run a creative pitch in my life up to this point. And suddenly you can start to feel all the knives were coming out and people were getting very territorial. And I think I survived about 2 years in doing that. And this was about 2.5 years into my time at Ogilvy in New York. And it started to eat at my soul because it was becoming very toxic internally. I don't know what it's like now because I'm sure things have changed in many years since I've left, and they've got formidable new leadership now. But it started to get quite toxic and territorial. But at the same time, I was also in a completely different country, and I love the United States. I'm here. I'm married to an American now, settled down. But 2.5 years in, I decided to actually give up and go home because I couldn't deal with the amount of antagonism that I was also receiving as a person of color in this country. It was very evident. Not New York specifically, but I used to also travel whilst I was holding a global role. I traveled within the US quite a lot to Midwest and South, etc. And I was the receiving end of lots of racial sort of terrible experiences, and I won't necessarily bore you with it, but they were really destructive experiences that really affected my self-worth, my well-being. And 2.5 years in, I decided this is not good for my heart, not good for my mind. And I had a conversation with the my boss at that time, the chief operations officer, and said, I really do want to move back. I'll still do the role, but I'm not in this context because the experience is not particularly pleasant. And I'll never forget my CEO at that point said, he just took for granted. He said, I'm very sorry, and I just took for granted the experience that you would have would be the exact same experience I would have. And he's a straight white man, and I'm a LGBTQ person of color, right? And it was chalk and cheese night and day. And I remember, and they were working, and this was in the month of April, and they were working on my paperwork to get me back because it was going to be a shift. And it was a day, sometime in April, I remember. It was a lovely spring day, and I came out of my apartment and I walked to a little cafe called the Rustic Table, and I went to get a coffee and I was sipping my cappuccino, and I had the Condé Nast Traveler, which is my most favorite magazine, and I was flipping through the pages of the Condé Nast Traveler, and there's this beautiful article on the late Anthony Bourdain. He had already passed at this point. And I'll never forget, I was just flipping the pages because I love food, and he was talking about his favorite haunts in New York. And there's this pull-out quote, and I'm paraphrasing it and butchering it because I can't remember the exact words, but this is a complete white page and this massive font of this pull-out quote from the 8-page article. And it said something to the effect of, you don't choose to be in New York, it chooses you. And if you're not made of tough stuff, it'll chew you up and spit you out. But if you survive at least 3 years, you're a New Yorker in the making. And going back to the point I talked a little earlier, Adrian, I'm an overachiever and very disciplined individual. And this was 2.5 years into my time in New York. And I went, oh, F this shit. I said, I'm not giving up. I'm sticking for my 3 years so that I can say I'm actually a New Yorker. 10 years later, I'm now married. I've bought a home. And I've really come into my own. And the one thing is, whilst I was experiencing difficult things, what I had failed to recognize is the United States also gives you a platform to build your voice and to make that voice count. And so it has been an incredible experience and humbling, in fact. And so this was around 2016, and I'll conclude with this element of the story when I talk about pivotal sort of experiences and my move to the States. I had been doing I've been doing sort of grassroots work in the diversity space, and you will remember that I never really leveraged that. Being an LGBT, openly out LGBTQ leader and a person of color in the UK, I kind of, and maybe it's the polite British side of all of us, right? Nobody talks about it. We all kind of know, we all expect it, and everybody's polite and hello, hello. But in the US, it's a platform for a lot of people, i.e., because there's a real contention and so many issues politically, socially, economically, etc. And in 2016, I was approached by the FT to put my name forward, approached by them to put my name forward for I think it was the very first top 100 LGBTQ leaders of the world list that they were putting together. And I literally went, oh my God, imposter syndrome. Like, I have not done anything. I have no idea how you got my name. And why would you even want to include me? Because I've done nothing. For some reason, someone heard that I was doing some grassroots level activity, particularly in education, where I was literally sponsoring a few students. I built a sort of a curriculum, KPI curriculum, particularly for minority individuals, to raise their caliber and their abilities in school so that they could graduate and they get better opportunities at university. And that got, basically, somebody talked about it and they heard about it and they wanted to include me. And so they approached me. I declined it the first time. They approached me again, and they ultimately approached me 3 times, and I declined it 3 times because I really just didn't feel I was worthy of anything, and it was completely the wrong thing to do. The fourth time they came to me, they said, okay, now we're not asking you, we're telling you, because your name's going to be included anyway, and it's an LGBTQ list, which means you're going to be outed, and we want to make sure you're comfortable with that. So, and I was fine with that. I wasn't like hidden or in the closet of any sort, but I wasn't literally walking around town with my sort of my badge on my sleeve going, I'm gay, right? And so I went to my HR team and I said, do you think I should do this? And went, oh my God, Suresh, of course you should do it. So I agreed to having my name in the hat. And the list comes out, and I cannot remember. I have them like in the number 60 something in the top 100. And and this was the real humbling moment. I thought it was all about me, and it wasn't. Because the moment my name appeared on the list, the number of people in my own organization at that point, Ogilvy, and the people in industry who approached me, who were people of color and LGBT, goes, thank you for being the light that we can never see. And the fact that I know that you are there in your senior position gives me hope that one day I can be that, and I can find a way to find my voice, etc. And I ate humble pie, Adrian, on that day, and then I realized I'm not a drag queen, what do you call it? Drag race, RuPaul Drag Race follower, fan, etc. But whatever RuPaul says, with great power comes great responsibility, or something like that. But that was the moment I went, oh my god, this is a lot bigger than me. I
Yeah.
have found something that actually I can do beyond just being this disciplined individual who drives growth. I can actually do good in the world, the little world that I can impact and affect change. That's the opportunity. And so I took it upon myself to, what else can I do to drive that change? And that gave me new energy. So beyond, and that was part of the decision to go, fuck that shit, I'm not going back. I'm going to stick here and stick my 3 years out, and ladder up to do more in industry. And that is almost like being, it's not a passion, it's literally not a calling, it's literally a responsibility I have. And I've used that in the same vein of, actually, because one thing you don't want people to do is to say, oh yeah, he's the DNI guy. No, I'm still the chief growth officer. I'm still driving business. I'm still driving growth. I just happen to be a person of color and an LGBTQ leader. And I know how to use that platform to actually help the rest of the world actually come up to speed with what needs to happen in terms of inclusion. So that's my sort of milestone potted history here.
I love that, and I do remember when that came out, and it was an incredible moment. And I remember seeing the response to that as well. If there are people who are in their career, coming up in their career, who are LGBTQ, listening to this, what advice would you give them from your experiences?
Um, I go back to the same advice I've given every individual that I've sort of mentored: is your focus should be your craft. Your focus should be your skill set. We are always, and everybody is going to be hit from all sides in life. Life is never, I don't know whether you remember that meme where everybody thinks that their life plan is, here's you and it's a straight level up to my next point. So, but actually, life is this journey, like this, right? So you're going like this. Life is not a straight path. It is going to take you in twists and turns, etc. And I think whatever your identity is, whether you're LGBTQ or a person of color, in fact, if you're mainstream, straight and white, like, everybody has a role and a seat at the table. It's what you're going to bring to that table to make it and to enrich it, to make it better, to make it more palatable, to bring your unique experiences that make this melting pot of humanity super interesting. And I think everybody's superpower is what they bring to that table, and that's what for me personally, that's how culture is created. And I use this phrase, and I came up with this phrase over this lunch that we had whilst in Cannes last week. Um, culture is culture is culture happens when you're brave enough to let your heart lead. And I think for me, that's a powerful message because it applies professionally, it applies personally, in every circumstance. Really, I think that is super super crucial, because in your work environment, when a business embraces its individuals for being who they are, their authentic selves, whether you're a person of color or LGBTQ, and all the experiences that you have from that part of you that you bring to the table, you are fuller and much more enriched in workplaces. So therefore, you bring your best, your and not just your energy, but your thinking, because you're free. You're not hiding and holding anything back, and that makes work better, right? So that your professional sort of life is on fire. At the same time, when you're living your full authentic self, your own personal world is much more enriched, because you're not compartmentalizing anything. You are one person throughout, and that's one thing I have tried to live. I'm the same person in life, and I'm the same person in my work. That authenticity doesn't change. And God bless my CEO, Naja Bellin White, and she said this to a couple of sort of people we were with in Cannes last week. She goes, the secret to Suresh is, when you bring him in, um, give him his parameters to work within. Like, you need to know, obviously, there's business parameters, but to also, the moment you've done that, you've done your homework, just stand back and trust him to do the job, because you need to empower the individual. Because what I bring is me, my full authentic self. And when parts of me are caged, or when parts of me are held back, I'm not giving everything that I am to who what I can do and what I can't do. So for me, anybody who feels like they come from a a minority or diverse walk of life, frankly, we all have a lot of experiences, whatever your spectrum, age, race, gender, say um, so gender, race, age, sexuality, and ability. We all have different levels of experiences that we bring to the table. And I think recognizing each one, allowing each one of us to live life authentically in each one of those spectrums or multiple spectrums, as some of us are, really allows the world to be a much better place professionally, personally.
I love that, and I love that culture happens when you're brave enough to let your heart lead. That's a brilliant, brilliant thing to saying to live by. You've had quite a range of experiences
Hmm.
from, when I first met you, we were working at an indie, you've gone to networks, you come back to the world of independence. I would love to hear your views on how does the experience differ between the two, and who would thrive in each of those setups? Who
Who
would
would
thrive in each of those setups?
thrive?
Yeah, so what do you need to be good at to thrive in an indie versus a network, for example?
Okay. It's funny you asked that question because this has been going through my mind on why I made the decision to move back to an independent. And for context, I'm a big believer that the universe knows when you're ready for a move and a change in your life. And every career move I've had has actually been device. But I didn't go looking; it came to me, and it always happened. Like even in the period of a certain number of weeks or a month, opportunities all came. In this instance, like five opportunities came to me all at the same time within a space of about 2 weeks, and I went, "Something's up." Right, the universe is telling you something, and I'm a big believer in that. And I literally go, "Okay, sit up and take heed and explore." And I had multiple interviews, and in full context, they were as a massive global holdco, two in-house agency roles, which are actually super interesting because it was actually to go and set up the in-house creative agency, and one very small business in the influential side, in the influencer side, and then this independent with MNC. And so I had varied opportunities, which was super interesting because it also meant all the conversation was very different. And then I thought back to where I was emotionally. And frankly, whilst I'd really experienced a tremendous time at the most recent Hulk I was within IPG and McCann, great experience and some really amazing. I had a formidable team, and the one thing that was keeping me there was my team. I genuinely loved the team that I handcrafted and created, and it was the people that were keeping me there. And any business, anyone who says I'm joining a company because it's a great name, etc., yes, there's a degree of sort of truth in terms of working for a great company, but a great company only becomes a great company because of its people. 100%. It's people makes the business. It's not the bricks and mortar at all. You can move locations. It's the brand name, yes, but the brand name can be tarnished the moment you get the wrong people in, right? So it always comes down to the people. So I thought long and hard about the best experience I ever had. When you and I worked together, Adrian, at the first company, Consolidated Communications, which doesn't exist today anymore. I think they sold into Four Communications. I was there for 11 years at Consolidated. I never thought I was going to move. Honestly, when I was being courted by other businesses, when I was a Consolidated, I remember when I told Warris when I left, I felt I was having an affair. It was dirty. It felt very dirty because I felt like, oh my God, like this is terrible because my company adored me. They loved me and they really valued me. But the best years of my career was a PR agency, Bukowski PR. And I tell you why, whilst I loved my time at Consolidated, it was the formidable start I had. What I loved about my time at Bukowski, and that was Mark Bukowski, who you know, in the UK, I was there with about 5 or 6 years. The people loved what they did. They loved what they did, and they were so good at it. Great media relations people who landed coverage every day, day in, day out. So much so, once they've landed the coverage, the next day they go, well, that's all news. I'm on to the next project. Because it made my job as a growth person so easy because the work was formidable. And if you remember the Bring Back Whisper campaign, it was bench benchmark setting as category defining work, right?
Yeah.
The very first time any brand leveraged social media. But it was formidable work, but more so, and I'll credit Larry Franks, who I don't know if is even in the industry anymore. He's still a friend. Larry Franks was the MD, and I tell you, it's until today it's burned in my mind. Every Monday when Larry comes in, and he was like a 6'5". His wife is actually a QVC presenter, Jill Franks, and we're very close. We're friends on Instagram. Um, and Larry, who's 6'5" and he's really big guy, and he'll ride his Harley Davidson into the office every day. And then every Monday in particular, what he did is, if not every day, I think I remember he might even have done that every day, but he would come in. He wouldn't even go to his desk initially, and he sat right next to me. He and I sat, it was open plan, we sat next to each other, carrying his helmet and his backpack and his leather jacket, and he'd go to every desk. And we were about 60 strong. He would go to every desk and ask everybody how they were, what their weekend was like, and then everybody rallied around Larry. Laza, as we called him. And I used to watch from my desk, and because he would come ultimately and sit next to me, and then he asked, Suresh, how are you? And that's what I really liked. How are you? What did you get up to? How's your life? And he'll ask about my, at that point, my ex, etc. And I remember, I completely forgot the question here, Adrian, but I remember thinking that that for me was what it meant to be a leader. And no, I know. So the question about whole codes and independence. And I remember that everybody rallied around Larry, and that's why we enjoyed being there. We all wanted to show up at work every day. We wanted to create a culture that mattered, and we wanted a business that really everybody was boosted because we were all part of it. We played hard, we partied hard, really, really well. And I realized after that I was all in Holcos after that. After the Bukowski experience, I started moving to Holcos. Initially, a first sort of independent Holco coal engine, but it was already very sort of integrated at that point, and then Ogilvy onwards, right? So I've been in big Holcos for the last 15 years. And when this opportunity coming to where I'm at right now, this is my swan song. Hopefully it's my last move in my career. I want to retire early, Adrian. Like the first three kids are graduated. There's one more kid to go who will graduate hopefully in the next few years. And for me, I wanted to have fun in my career. And I put that in my LinkedIn post. I literally said, this move is because I want to have fun in my career again. I want to enjoy my career. And I thought back to, when did I ever really enjoy my career? I'm not saying that my time at Ogilvy, don't get me wrong, all the experiences I've had were great learning experiences, etc. But when I, Suresh, truly had fun and enjoyed, it was that time at Bukowski, because I remember it didn't matter when I woke up or when I slept or what I did, because I was so inspired by the people, the team, the energy, and what I did, and I believed in it. I truly believed in it. And I realized, wow, it was the independent world. It was genuinely the independent world. And so I think Holcos have a role to play. And I think maybe for me, and it's a great training ground, by the way, the infrastructure, etc. Holcos, and I would never discourage anybody from joining a Holco, because it was great. I learned a lot. I became the person I am because of that. And but where I'm at in my career, it was definitely time for an independent, because I really wanted to really enjoy my career again. And I wanted to be able to work at speed. Independence, unfortunately, in a very fast evolving communications world, we're all driven by the speed of social media, right? We're no longer living in a world where it takes 3 months or 6 months to develop the strategy. Then we take 9 months to develop the creative, and hopefully a year and a half when we land the big spot on TV, it's like it's going to be relevant. No, sorry, like today's trend will be dated tomorrow, be outdated tomorrow, and you've got to be able to react really quickly. And unfortunately, where I've seen now, having done 15 years, the big whole codes don't have that ability. And in a way, one thing that I was seeing with the IPG acquisition by Omnicom, I was just going to be a much smaller fish in a much bigger pond. And it was time to just go, no, this is not what I want for the last sort of 3-5 years of my career. I really want to be able to make a big impact. And if anything, create my own legacy. And for me, the opportunities within the independent.
Nice. And what would you like that legacy to be?
That Suresh was the guy who lived up to what he believed in, which is helping create culture by letting his heart lead.
Oh, lovely. Okay.
That's what I hope.
I'm going to ask you one last question, and if you were to give yourself a piece of advice when you were 25 years old, when you were just coming out of that boy band that we talked about at the beginning, what would that piece of advice be?
Wow, good question. Because I have so many pieces of advice.
I bet.
I would say trust your instincts. Trust your instincts. They would never steer you wrong. And the best decisions I've ever made were because I trusted my instincts. And don't get me wrong, there have been many times I didn't listen to my instinct because I was trying to rationalize it. Disciplined, pragmatic, realist in me was always like, just follow the rules, follow the rules. Sometimes you've got to learn to paint outside the box, outside the lines, because when you follow those instincts, they never steer you wrong. And if they do steer you wrong, it's an opportunity to learn. I want to quickly add that when they do steer you to a path that you didn't think you're going to get to, it proves to be an amazing teaching and learning opportunity, and that is never wasted.
Amazing. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Suresh.
Adrian, thank you.
I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you.
Likewise.